These are the published papers, but to tell you, he has the largest number of publications, over 1,170 papers in peer-reviewed journals, including 750 original articles, 256 review articles, and invited editorials. His work has received over 62,800 citations and has a H index of 112.IN 2012. Dr. Mohan received the prestigious Padma Shri from Government of India. Presenting Dr. V Mohan. Sir, it's all yours.
Thank you, Arvind, for those very generous words, Dr. Anand Moses. I'd like to first of all tell you that this is a new topic on which I've been talking, and something which is very close to my heart, because whatever we hear in any conference, ultimately the proof of the pudding is whether people live long enough. And we always talk about diabetes reducing the lifespan. We already heard it this morning, and it's true. I'll show you also data that is true. So in this context, if somebody can live up to 100 years of age with good health, it is nothing short of a miracle. And that's what this talk is all about. So the question is it really a hype or is it a reality? So I'll talk about that, but I'd like to thank the team, the primer team, for yet another edition of debate. Dr. Kumar, Arvind, of course, Krishna has been very kind to me, and Sanjay and Bhavna and the organizing committee. For this particular talk, I don't have any conflict of interest to declare, but I'd like to start here with the first slide that you see, and this is just come out at the Busan IDF World Congress 1 month ago, where the latest numbers for India have been released. And according to this IDF Atlas, the 9th edition, today we have 77 million people with diabetes in India. This primarily comes from the work of the INDIAB study, which is being done all over the country. But if you look at the projections, by 2030, over 100 million people with diabetes, and by 2045, 134 million. We all know that these are very conservative figures. And for example, the 70 million, just 10 years ago, we said will come in 2030. We're already talking about it now. So these numbers are very conservative, and they really don't make much of a meaning, because it keeps changing all the time. The prevalences keep changing, the population keeps changing. But just suffice to know that these numbers you're talking about now, even at 77 million, it's already larger than UK. It's already 3 times Australia. So the number of people in India with diabetes is more than the whole of UK. So that's the kind of scale that you're talking about. Now, if it's just a number, a fasting above this and a 2-hour above this, or an A1C above that, just counting a few people, then it really doesn't matter. What we know is that if we don't watch out, this can lead to complications. And one of the most important, of course, is glucose control. So what is the A1C, mean A1C in India? It's difficult to get a figure, but there have been some attempts. And this is the DiabCare India study. In 2001, DiabCare India was done. And at that time, the mean A1C across all diabetic clinics and endocrine clinics who participated, more than 100 such clinics, some of the best clinics in the country were included. And the mean in 2001 was 8.7. So we thought 10 years later, it will be 7 point something. It was actually worse. It was 8.9. And look at the standard deviation, plus minus 2.1. Now you may say, well, that's understandable, because the worst cases go to the best diabetologists and endocrinologists. So you're seeing the worst scenario, and this is not true for India. So if you want to know India, you must go home to home, okay, which is not easy to do. You go home to home, representative sample in India, and then get A1Cs done. It's like a near impossible task. But we did it. In ICMR INDIAB study, we actually have A1Cs on everyone who was tested in India in a representative manner. The full study is just getting completed. We have the last 4 states going on now. Should be completed by June, July of this year, the entire 31 states. But when we had the first 4 states, north, south, east, west, 1 in each, when we completed, we published just to have a look at it. Is it very different from what we see in the clinic? Okay? And these are the results. This is Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and some of the good states actually. Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Chandigarh, and Jharkhand. So 3 of those are really important, very so-called developed states. And there, what we found was that if you look at A1C less than 7, 7 to 8 and more than 7 to 9 and more than 9, only 30% had A1C below 7% in these 4 states put together. If you look at the other end, if you look at those at poor control, more than 9% A1C, and these are not people who came to the clinic and so on, and these are done in a central lab, done in our own lab. We got all the samples in from the entire country, all the samples come to our center and we do it. So it's a centralized lab, there's no lab problem. Over 9%, 37% of people in rural India and 32% of people in urban India have A1C above 9%. And we all know that as the A1C goes up, look at what happens. We look at 5, 6, 7, 8%, and this is the risk of complications, predominantly microvascular complication, but also some macrovascular complications. You can see by the time you reach 9, the incidence of complications is going very high. Now, is this just theoretical, or do you have actual data on complications? We have incident data on virtually all the complications. So we have retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy, everything, urban, rural, everything. Now we're getting incident data. For the first time, we'll be getting new onset complications in a population-based data that will be completed by the end of this year or early next year. We hope to publish that. But this is prevalent data, or the prevalence of complications at any given time. You can see that about a quarter of people have either retinopathy or nephropathy, and all the complications we talked about today are already there in the population. This translates to millions of people, for example, with kidney disease, the complication which we just talked about now. So if you're going to get millions of people with these complications, it's obvious that people are going to die earlier than people who don't have diabetes. Why does this happen? It predominantly occurs because of clinical inertia. We are not seeing our patients early enough, we are not treating them aggressively enough, and therefore there is clinical inertia. And clinical inertia is defined as lack of treatment intensification when they are not at evidence-based goals. They are supposed to be at 7% A1C, but we are not doing that, okay? And this is what happens. As the A1C goes up, you are accumulating what's called as a glycemic burden. And it's this glycemic burden which gets translated into complications. And the longer you wait, you can see from 7%, what's shown below is the months. So the more the number of months you wait, the glycemic burden keeps on increasing. So suppose somebody came back to you after 1 or 2 years, all this glycemic burden is gone. You can't get it back. It's already imprinted in your kidney and your heart and in your nerves and in your eyes, and you can't take it back. So what's the solution? Solution is call them back earlier. If you call them back earlier, for example, if they came back there, you have a chance. You have a chance, the patient has a chance to review and bring it down. And if you bring it down, the green is still unavoidable because they came back only there. But the red there is avoidable, okay? What if they came back earlier? What you'll do is you will reduce the glycemic burden. And that's the first point I want to make today. If you want to make your patients live longer, you have to reduce clinical inertia. You have to reduce this glycemic burden. Well, you may say all this is just theory. Do you have any data? Yes, before I talk, I always have data. This is a study which Anjana and I did a few years ago. All we did was, we looked at people, should they come regularly for follow-up? Because there's a cost involved. Because they have to keep coming back to you and doing your tests, and then having the consultations done and the A1C done, there is a cost to that. So what we did was, we looked at people who came regularly, we called them as the regular follow-up people, and then those didn't come, so that is defined as 3 to 4 visits a year to the center. And then we looked at people who come irregularly, once a year or less than once a year. We followed them up for about 9 years, and that's what happened. The one on the top is the A1Cs of the people who came irregularly to us. And the one below is the one who came regularly to us. Exactly what I showed you in the theoretical graph is shown here. Every time it went up, it came down again. And look at the mean values all around 7. Whereas when they came back irregularly for follow-up, it was all 8, 8, 8, and so on, because they not had a chance to bring their sugars down. From there, we actually calculated the glycemic burden. By using multiple A1Cs, there's a formula to calculate the glycemic burden. That is shown in the dark blue below for those who are irregular follow-up, and the green below for those who came for follow-up. And in one glance, even a layman can say that they are accumulating glycemic burden, therefore paving the way for complications. And what we found was that those who came regularly for follow-up, we took only cases who did not have complications. And then after 9 years, we saw how many developed complications. To cut a long story short, if you read that paper, there was a 50% higher incidence of retinopathy and nephropathy for those who did not come regularly for follow-up. So the message, the second message is that you have to come back regularly and you have to work on that. You have to reduce the glycemic burden, and that can result in a 50% reduction in retinopathy and nephropathy over a 10-year period. Now switching to life expectancy, I think Krishna already showed you one slide where people with diabetes lose about 10 years of life, and with kidney disease, he said 16 years of life. Incidentally, there was a mistake in the printing of question number 33, where I've asked what is the mean number of years lost for people with diabetes. The answers given are 5, 10, 20, and again, no, 5, 12, 20, and again 12. That's wrong. So you should have had 7 there. The answer is 7 actually. The mean is 7. Different studies report different things, but on an average, in type 2 diabetes, you lose about 7 years of age. In type 1 diabetes, you actually lose 20 years of age. A type 1 diabetic loses 20 years of age. And of course, British studies are there, Canadian studies are there. But let's take it that on an average, this is the best study, about 7 years of life are lost for people with diabetes. Okay? Remember the title of the talk was, can diabetic people live up to 100? And here I'm telling you that they're losing 7 years of life. This loss is more the younger you get diabetes. If you get diabetes when you're 80, 85 years old, how long are you going to live anyway? So you're not going to lose much between a person with diabetes, without diabetes, males, females, compared to people without diabetes, not much change. But you get it when you're 35, 40 years old, your exposure to diabetes is so much more, you're going to get hit. And those are the people who lose their life expectancy quite considerably. So the earlier you get it, the more aggressive you have to be, otherwise you're going to lose a lot of years of life. And that's one of the reasons why type 1 patients lose up to 20 years. Is there Indian data on mortality? Well, we do have. The first one is a CUP study, relatively small study, where we followed up patients for about 10 years, compared people with diabetes, without diabetes in the population, and then saw how many years they lose. We found that you can see the curves, how they fall, and the graphs are not looking very good because it's a very small study. But we still had a 10-year follow-up of these people, and you can see that people with diabetes are dying faster. Then we had, and it was of course almost a 2-fold higher mortality in people with diabetes compared to those without. More recently, we published the CURE study. Now, this is a much larger study. Again, we had a 10-year follow-up, and this time what we showed was that it's the younger people who seemed to have a higher mortality. At higher age groups, you are not seeing that difference so prominently. And again, we tried to look at what is a population attributable risk for mortality. What are the factors which made people die? You can do that by doing a PPAR or partial population attributable risk. What we found was physical inactivity, cholesterol, triglycerides, smoking, alcohol, and hypertension, all controllable. All controllable. So if you control those, the hypothesis is, can people with diabetes live just like people without diabetes? Now, what's the current life expectancy in India? If you compare with United States, China, in India, the latest figures show it's about 67, 68 years for males and about 69 years for females. So it's less than 70 years of age for people without diabetes. Okay? If you look at the pyramid, the population pyramid of India, this is 2019 figures. You know what percentage of people are above 90 years of age in India? It's 0.001%. So that's a percentage of chance that we all have to live up to 90 years of age, 0.001. Many of us have crossed 65. And you know how many percentage of India is above 65 years old? 15%. So I'm already in that 15% of lucky people who have crossed 65. Because you're going to die at 67, 69. You're already 65. What's your percentage of living? I mean, these are actual statistics. These are Indian statistics, okay? So, but this 001 actually, because of 1.3 billion people, there are 13.7 lakh people above 90 years of age in India, by the way, okay, in case you didn't know. Right. Now, lifespan, now let's put the maths together. Lifespan of India is 67 years, okay? And men, we've mentioned something, you're going to lose 7 years. So how much will a diabetic live up to? 60 years. Then where's the question of 100 years? Where's the question of 90 years? So is it a complete hype? Well, no, it's changing. Is long-term survival diabetes possible? This is the first report. In 2013, we reported the first, and I think till today, the only report in the world which shows that people with diabetes, this is what got me my Harold Rifkin Award. So we reported for the first time that 40-year survival and 50-year survival was possible in people with type 2 diabetes. It's never been reported by anyone else, even in these last 7 years, okay? So that opened my eyes and said, well, people are living 40, 50 years. But here, we didn't take age into consideration. He could have been 25 years old, 40, 50 years, he's 65 years old, he's lived his 40 years. We took only duration. And then we had a match group of non-survivors. That's why this paper is still in the top 10 papers which are quoted in the field of diabetes. So, and what did we show at the end of it? What did we show? The editor said, you must bring out a message. Message is very simple. Better blood pressure control, blood sugar control, lipid control. These three, if you do, they're living long enough, okay? So theoretically, if you control these three, your people should be able to live long enough. This is the data showing you that if you look at A1C, survivors had better, less than 7%, 7.6, and more than 10.5. If you look at LDL cholesterol, which is under control, the survivors had far better than those who did not survive. And then I started looking at, are there people who are actually living more than 90? And then I saw my first case and my second case and my third case. I started talking around to people at Joslin, Mayo, Oxford, and so on. How many cases have you seen above 90 years of age? One, maybe? I don't remember. I said, I've got 325. He said, publish it. I said, yeah, exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to publish that. So we published very recently this report of 325 patients. And the editor said, again, match it with people who are 50, 60 years old. Only then it makes any sense. So we did that. And this is the group above 90 years, 325. We could only match 278 between 50 and 60 years. But even there, the difference came out. If you look at kidney disease, much less in the survivors, and that's why in those who have lived up to 90 years, that's why they lived longer. Of course, they do have a little more of peripheral vascular disease and coronary artery disease, but not severe enough to kill them, otherwise they would have died. So if you measure coronary artery disease, they have it, but it's milder, and they could live with that. Stable angina, for example, okay? So what we showed, that this is the first report on people about 90 years of age, and significant differences were there. And again, it came back to glycemic control and better blood pressure control and better lipid control. I called these people together. This is a group of people whom I actually brought in. They were healthy enough to come into the clinic, and now the numbers are increasing. I still have many more who have joined this group now. And this guy that you see sitting wearing the safari suit, second from there, the first guy you all recognize, he is Sabanayagam, who was our chief secretary, who's still alive. He's 96 now. The next one to him is Professor Chitti Babu. He celebrated his 100th birthday, and he invited me as a chief guest for that. So when I went there, I had a chat with him. He's still alive, by the way. He's crossed 100. So you may say, maybe he got it when he's 99, maybe, and now he's got 1 year. He got it when he was 40. Okay, he's treated by my father. I treated him. My daughter treated him, and he survived all of us. And now he is now 100 years old. So I went and met him, and then I asked him, Mom and Dad, and the first thing he did was he took vibhuti and put it on me. So you'll see in the video a big vibhuti thing. That's what he did, and you'll find vibhuti all over himself. So I went there. I asked him why.
Following instructions for control of diabetes. And all I can say is, he has been specially giving me the right directions that I have been able to do. So, I am telling all diabetic patients, you have to observe certain instructions given by the doctor. They are able to give the right advice at the right moment, and also see to it that we observe the conditions for controlling diabetes. That I have done, but I never expected that I would live this long.
So he says says he never expected he lives so long, but he's crossed 100. So then what are my messages if you want to live up to 100? I asked all these guys, I've taken more interviews, I've gone through them. First is detect diabetes early. You're going to have clinical inertia if you don't do that. Keep sugars, BP and lipids under control. Again and again the same message is coming. The first 10 years is very important. 2-3 speakers already here have already said that, clinical inertia. If during the first 10 years diabetes controlled well, very rarely will they develop severe complications. I don't know if you've seen that, I see it repeatedly. If you lose the first 10 years, it's gone. So that's very important. Reduce stress, exercise regularly and eat reasonably. Were all these guys marathon runners? Not one of them, but they all walked 30 minutes. Okay. Did they all eat sweets? Yes, they still eat sweets. My friend is still very fond of sweets. He gave me sweets, I gave him sweets, but very occasionally. Okay. Most importantly, get them to come for the diabetes checkup at least 3 to 4 times a year. That's the most important, I would say. From day one, ABC should be kept under control. A1C less than 7%, BP at normal range, cholesterol LDL within normal limits. If one follows these mantras, even people with diabetes can hope to live up to 100 years. Now, I said it was a hype. Yes, partly it's a hype, but it's also a reality. If one can do it, if another 300 are waiting to get there, I can't say that, oh, it's only a hype. It's a reality. We must push more and more of them to get there. My father taught me this. I never believed him when he taught me this. He said, a well-disciplined and controlled person with diabetes is often better and healthier than one without diabetes. I used to argue with him, no, but it's reducing years. And he said, no. They have a motivation to do it, which a person without diabetes doesn't have. Thank you very much.